Parents gave my sister a 15K Cartier watch at their anniversary, then took a family photo without me. I remember the moment like a slow-motion scene from a movie. The room was glowing with golden light, crystal glasses clinking, and everyone's laughter spilling over the long dining table draped in ivory linen. My parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, a milestone they had been talking about for months, and they wanted it to be grand. Flowers imported from Italy, a string quartet in the corner, and dishes prepared by a private chef. Every detail screamed perfection, as if they were determined to prove to the world that our family was flawless, enviable, complete. But in the midst of that polished perfection, I felt like a stranger, hovering at the edge of my own bloodline. Then came the gift. My father rose slowly, smiling in that proud, calculated way he always did when there was an audience, and presented a small, velvet Cartier box to my younger sister. Gasps filled the air, hands clapped in excitement, and my mother's eyes shimmered with tears, as if this were the most natural expression of love. My sister's face lit up, the spotlight fully on her, and she opened the box to reveal a rose gold Cartier watch, sparkling under the chandelier like a crown jewel. $15,000, my uncle whispered to his wife, not realizing I could hear. 15,000 on my parents' anniversary to my sister, while I sat silent at the far end of the table, my glass of champagne untouched, my smile brittle. I clapped like everyone else, but inside I could feel something twisting, an old wound splitting open again, the same wound that had followed me since childhood, that I was always the afterthought, the shadow standing behind my sister's light. But the true sting came minutes later, when my mother stood up and gathered everyone for a family photo. Only the most beloved people, she announced, her voice warm and casual. I rose instinctively, smoothing the skirt of my dress, ready to join the group. But then, with a simple wave of her hand, she stopped me. Oh no, sweetheart, just us, just the closest ones. And before I could process it, before I could find words to question what she meant, the camera flashed, capturing my parents, my sister, with her glittering watch, and the rest of them smiling in a perfect frame, without me. My heart pounded, so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. I froze, half standing, half sinking back into my chair, invisible in plain sight. In that instant, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about a watch or a photo. It was about a lifetime of erasure, of being treated like a placeholder in my own family story. And I knew, as I sat there in silence, that this moment would not pass quietly, because one day soon, they would learn what it meant to push me out of the picture. I didn't sleep that night. The image of them, lined up, perfectly arranged, my sister at the center with her Cartier, sparkling under the lights, kept replaying in my head like a cruel loop I couldn't turn off. I kept hearing my mother's words, only the most beloved people. It wasn't just the sting of exclusion. It was the clarity of it. She hadn't slipped. She hadn't forgotten. She had said it intentionally, and everyone went along with it. No one blinked. No one whispered. No one pulled me into the frame. They smiled. They posed. And I disappeared. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the other moments when I had been pushed aside. Birthdays when my presents were practical, while my sisters were wrapped in luxury. School plays when they missed my performance, but showered her with flowers. Even my graduation felt like a side note, because it was just a bachelor's degree compared to her engagement, which conveniently happened that same weekend. At the time, I told myself it was coincidence, or maybe that I just wasn't the kind of daughter who drew attention. But lying there in the dark, I realized it had never been coincidence. It had been design. They had always chosen her. And they had chosen to make me small. The watch was more than jewelry. It was a symbol. A loud, sparkling declaration of where their loyalty lay. And that photograph, God, that photograph. It was proof, a piece of history, forever excluding me, forever telling the world that their family was perfect, beloved, whole, without me. My anger simmered into something sharper. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. That's what they expected. That I would break down, cry, lash out, and prove them right for leaving me out. No. If they thought erasing me would silence me, they were wrong. Because silence can be louder than any outburst, if you know how to use it. So I began to plan, slowly, carefully. I started by collecting the evidence. Screenshots of that family photo when they posted it online with the caption, "Only the most beloved people." Receipts of my sister's Cartier gift. I noted dates, times, exact words spoken at the dinner. It may sound obsessive, but I knew I needed precision, facts to anchor me when they inevitably tried to gaslight me. And they would. My parents had perfected the art of rewriting history, of saying, "You're too sensitive," or, "That's not how it happened. Not this time." This time, I would hold the record in my hands. What they didn't realize was that for years, I had been building a life of my own outside their picture. Friends who actually valued me. A career that was quietly gaining traction. A bank account they didn't know about. And connections. Small, powerful connections that I had never flaunted but kept carefully cultivated. They thought I was invisible. What they didn't know was that I was watching, listening, waiting. That night, as dawn began to bleed into the sky, I made myself a promise. I would not fight for their approval anymore. I would not beg to be in their frame. Instead, I would take control of my own narrative, and in doing so, I would show them what it felt like to be excluded when it mattered most. Little did they know that their glittering celebration, their precious Cartier watch, and their perfect family photo were not the closing of a chapter. They were the beginning of mine, and mine was going to be longer, louder, and unforgettable. Growing up. The imbalance had always been there, though I didn't have the words for it back then. I remember being 9 years old and saving every penny of my allowance to buy my mother a silk scarf I had seen at a boutique downtown. I was so proud when I presented it to her on her birthday, wrapping it carefully in tissue paper. She smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Thank you, sweetheart. It's lovely." But later that evening, my father came home carrying a velvet box for my sister, who was only 6 at the time. Inside was a diamond-studded charm bracelet, far too expensive for a child. But they laughed and said, "Well, she's special, she deserves it." I remember standing there, holding the empty tissue paper, watching my sister beam as the bracelet jingled on her tiny wrist. And something inside me knew the roles had been set. She was the star, I was the supporting cast. It only deepened as we grew older. In high school, I worked shifts at the local cafe to save for a second-hand car. My sister, 2 years younger, failed her driving test twice, but was still gifted a brand new car on her 16th birthday, wrapped in a massive red bow in the driveway. Everyone gathered around taking pictures, posting them online, hashtags, about our golden girl's sweet 16. No one noticed me quietly driving off to work in my dented old Toyota, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Even then, I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself independence was worth more than handouts. But late at night, when I saw the comments on her posts, "You're so lucky. Your parents must be amazing," a bitter taste filled my mouth, because luck had nothing to do with it. Favoritism did. By the time we were in college, the divide had turned into a canyon. I put myself through school with scholarships, part-time jobs, and sleepless nights. My sister, full tuition paid, a furnished apartment near campus, and a monthly allowance bigger than my entire paycheck. And whenever I came home for the holidays, the conversations at the dinner table were always about her classes, her boyfriend, her plans. If I spoke, it was only long enough for someone to glance at me before steering the topic back to her. It was like I was a ghost in my own family home. Still, I endured. I thought maybe if I just kept my head down, worked hard, built a stable life, one day they would see me. One day they would realize my value. But the anniversary night showed me the truth, with a cruelty so sharp, I couldn't ignore it anymore. They didn't forget me by accident. They excluded me, because that was who I was to them. The expendable one, the afterthought, the filler in the background, who could be cut from the picture without consequence. What they underestimated was how much strength grows in the shadows. While my sister was basking in the constant glow of their attention, I was learning resilience. While she was handed luxury and ease, I was building grit and independence. And now, at this anniversary, with their $15,000 watch gleaming on her wrist and my absence crystallized in a photo, I realized something important. I didn't need their approval anymore. But they, whether they knew it or not, would one day need me. That thought became the seed of my plan. Revenge for me wasn't going to be loud or chaotic. It wasn't going to be a tantrum that could be dismissed as bitterness. It was going to be quiet, precise, undeniable. The kind of revenge that doesn't just sting for a moment. It rewrites the story. And as I sat in my room staring at the ceiling that night, I began piecing together all the threads I had been collecting for years. Threads they had been too arrogant to notice. Connections at my job. Knowledge about the family business. Details about finances I had overheard, brushed aside at the time, but now recalled with clarity. They had erased me from the photo, but I was about to step into a far bigger frame, one they couldn't crop me out of. This wasn't going to be about getting even. This was going to be about finally turning the spotlight where it belonged, on me, and once it turned, there would be no way for them to dim it again. My father had always been secretive about the family business, but he also loved to brag when he felt safe. As a child, I would sit at the dinner table, listening to him ramble about deals, about profits, about which relatives he trusted and which he didn't. He never noticed how carefully I absorbed every word. He thought of me as the quiet one, the one who sat politely and ate in silence, the one who didn't understand business. What he didn't realize was that silence is powerful. It makes people underestimate you, and when they underestimate you, they reveal everything. By the time I was 20, I already knew which suppliers always caused problems, which clients demanded special treatment, and which cousins had their names tied to assets, but not the work. I filed it all away in my memory, quietly, like a secretary no one acknowledged. When I got older, I chose not to work directly for the family company, partly because I knew they would never let me hold any real power, and partly because I wanted distance. Instead, I took a job in finance, starting small, learning from the bottom up. I studied contracts, tax codes, investment strategies. I watched colleagues make mistakes and figured out how not to repeat them. And slowly, I built relationships. Clients who trusted me, mentors who respected me, people who valued what I brought to the table. My family never asked about it. If I mentioned work, the topic was brushed aside, as if my career was a hobby compared to my sister's glamorous ventures. They didn't even notice when one of my firm's biggest accounts overlapped with their suppliers. They didn't see me moving closer to their world, step by step, until one day I was in a position where I knew more about their finances than they assumed possible. At the anniversary dinner, when my father toasted my sister and the Cartier sparkled on her wrist, I kept my face still, my smile polite, but my mind was already racing. I knew their biggest weakness wasn't money. It was image. My parents had spent their entire lives crafting a facade of perfection. The photo they posted with the caption, "Only the most beloved people," was more than a careless exclusion. It was a declaration to the world. This is who we are. This is our legacy. They believed that narrative was untouchable, but I knew better. All facades crack if you apply enough pressure in the right spot. The first step was patience. I didn't storm out of the party, though every muscle in my body wanted to. I didn't confront them, though the words burned in my throat. Instead, I stayed, smiled, even helped clear plates when the night wound down. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. I wanted them to believe I accepted it, that I was still the compliant shadow they could ignore, because when people think you're harmless, they lower their guard. And when they lower their guard, You can finally strike. Over the next weeks, I began gathering more than memories. I combed through online archives, public business records, shareholder lists. I requested documents through connections I had at my firm. Slowly, the puzzle pieces came together. Who actually owned what? Where the money was moving? What debts were being quietly hidden under layers of family trust? It was worse than I imagined. For all their boasting, my parents weren't as untouchable as they pretended. There were cracks, lawsuits brewing, mismanaged accounts, cousins who were ready to jump ship if the right incentive appeared. And through it all, my sister floated, untouched, oblivious in her designer clothes, flaunting her Cartier on social media, while the ground beneath the family empire quietly trembled. I didn't want destruction for the sake of destruction. That would have made me like them. Petty, cruel, careless. What I wanted was control. I wanted my voice in the story, my place in the frame they had cut me out of. And if I had to use their own secrets to carve it, so be it. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had spent a lifetime silencing me, but their downfall would come from my silence. The years I spent listening when they thought I didn't matter. I still remember the first time I showed my lawyer the family photo, the caption beneath it, and then handed him the documents I had collected. He raised an eyebrow, flipping through the files slowly, then looked at me with a kind of cautious respect. "You've been sitting on this for how long?" he asked. "Long enough," I said. And in that moment, I felt something shift. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their choices. I was the one making the moves. That night at the anniversary party, they erased me from the photo. But what they didn't know was that I had already begun writing a new picture. One they couldn't erase, one they couldn't control. And soon, very soon, they would learn that the daughter they dismissed was the one holding the frame all along. I started with the photo, the one they had posted online with that sickening caption, "Only the most beloved people." At first glance, it was just another staged family portrait. Smiling faces in formal attire under a canopy of twinkling lights. But to me, it was Exhibit A. I downloaded it, printed it, time-stamped it. I even captured the comments flooding in. Hundreds of acquaintances congratulating them on their beautiful family, praising their perfect unity, not realizing they were applauding an edited truth. I highlighted the words, "most beloved," because those two words carried more weight than they knew. They weren't a casual phrase. They were a declaration. And declarations, once made public, can come back like a boomerang. Then I went after the paper trail. I called in favors from colleagues who owed me, quietly requesting information that technically sat in the public domain, but wasn't easy to find, unless you knew where to look. Board filings, financial disclosures, partnership agreements. Dry words to most people, but to me, they were a gold mine. I traced patterns of spending, noting where the company money ended and the personal indulgences began. My father had always been careful, but careful still leaves footprints. The Cartier watch itself, for instance, it hadn't been bought personally. The receipt, which I obtained through one of my firm's contacts, showed it had been expensed under client relations. It wasn't just a gift. It was a misappropriation. My father had turned company funds into my sister's new trophy. I remember staring at that receipt for a long time, my chest tightening. To them, $15,000 was nothing, just another way to showcase affection. To me, it was 2 years' worth of student loan payments. It was months of rent. It was health insurance, groceries, security, and yet they hadn't thought twice. That wasn't love. It was theft, dressed up as generosity. Once I had that, the rest began to fall like dominoes. I discovered an LLC registered in my mother's maiden name, one that funneled consulting fees away from the main business. I discovered an investment property listed under my cousin's name, but paid for entirely from the family's corporate account. I discovered a loan taken out against shares that my father had never disclosed at shareholder meetings. The deeper I dug, The more it became clear, the empire they paraded as unshakable was built on hollow ground. And I wasn't just looking at numbers. I was looking at leverage. But leverage alone wasn't enough. I needed timing. I needed to wait for the moment when their image mattered most, when exposure would cut the deepest. So I kept my silence. I went to family dinners, sat through my sister's endless stories about trips to Paris and shopping sprees in Milan, nodded politely when my parents boasted about her accomplishments. I played the role of the dutiful, invisible daughter. All the while, my files grew thicker, my evidence sharper, my patience stronger. And then fate handed me the perfect openings. My parents announced that the family business was entering talks with a major investor, a partnership that would secure the future for generations. They threw a party, of course. Invitations were sent, photographers booked, speeches prepared. It was going to be their biggest display yet, a chance to cement their image of wealth, power, and unity. They didn't even hesitate to ask me to help with logistics, because that was my role, wasn't it? The helper, the extra pair of hands, the one behind the curtain, unseen. I agreed, I smiled, and I made sure that when the spotlight turned on that night, it would not shine the way they intended. While they rehearsed their speeches and polished their smiles, I worked behind the scenes. I quietly shared select pieces of evidence with the right people, just enough to raise questions. Not enough to point back to me. The receipt for the Cartier watch, the LLC under my mother's maiden name, the property in my cousin's name, all of it trickled into the hands of regulators and investors who, once suspicious, began digging on their own. I didn't need to scream. I only needed to plant the seeds. Their own arrogance would water them, and when the night of the grand event arrived, I stood in the crowd, a glass of champagne in my hand, watching my father raise his arms and declare the family's bright future. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled, investors nodded. My sister, draped in designer silk, with her Cartier glittering, smiled as if the world belonged to her. For a moment, it looked like they had won, that they had succeeded in erasing me, completely, presenting a flawless portrait to the world. But then the questions started, quiet at first, then louder. An investor asking about undisclosed debts, a journalist pressing about the LLC, a whisper spreading through the crowd about misused funds. My father faltered. My mother's smile froze. My sister's glittering watch suddenly looked like evidence, not elegance. I sipped my champagne, calm, composed, unseen at the edge of the room. They had erased me from their photo, but now I was the one framing theirs. And this time, the picture would be remembered, not as perfect, but as fractured. What they didn't yet realize was that this was only the beginning. The silence in the ballroom that night was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't quiet, not really. There were murmurs, chairs scraping, the clink of glasses set down too hard. But it was the silence of confidence cracking, of an audience turning. My father had always thrived in rooms like this, where his booming voice could drown out doubt. But when the first investor raised his hand and asked about a line item in the quarterly reports, I saw the hesitation in his eyes. He stammered, just for a moment, but I caught it. The man who always had an answer, who always brushed away concerns with polished charm, suddenly looked cornered. Those figures, the investor said, don't align with the LLC filings. We've seen under the name Harrington Consulting. Could you clarify the relationship between that entity and your core business? The question hit like a stone, tossed into glass. I saw my mother's hand tighten around her wine glass, her knuckles whitening. My father chuckled, tried to wave it off. Oh, a minor administrative matter, nothing worth worrying about. But another voice cut in, sharper this time. It's hardly minor. We've been reviewing the documents for weeks. There are discrepancies. I stayed in my corner, invisible as always, but I felt the electricity shift. Journalists began flipping through their notes, murmuring to each other. Investors whispered, brows furrowed. My sister leaned into my mother, whispering frantically, her Cartier flashing under the lights like a beacon of hypocrisy. Then came the second blow. A reporter from a financial magazine, bold and unrelenting, stood up and held up a sheet of paper. The very receipt I had made sure found its way into the right hands. "Can you comment?" she asked loudly, her voice carrying across the room, "on why company funds were used to purchase a $15,000 Cartier watch? A watch that, according to social media, was gifted to your younger daughter at your anniversary party." Every head turned. Every camera swung toward the stage. My sister froze, her hand instinctively covering her wrist, as if to hide the watch. But it was too late. The photographs were already circulating. Evidence matched against receipts, indulgence against accountability. My father opened his mouth, closed it, then forced another laugh. "This is ridiculous. A misunderstanding." But the room wasn't buying it anymore. The murmurs had turned into open suspicion. People began standing, some leaving quietly, others pressing forward with more questions. The facade, so carefully constructed over decades, was shattering in real time. And me? I stood still, sipping my champagne. The same silence they had once, weaponized against me, now my greatest shield. Nobody saw me as the cause. Nobody even looked my way. I was just another guest in the crowd. One of many, my face unremarkable, forgettable. Yet it was my hand that had turned the spotlight, my patience that had planted the cracks. I thought of that family photo, the one where I had been excluded, left sitting in my chair as they smiled without me. At the time, it felt like erasure. Now I realized it had been freedom, because by pushing me out of the frame, they had given me the perfect vantage point to see every flaw, every secret. They thought I was powerless because I wasn't in the picture, but standing outside of it gave me all the power in the world. That night was not the end. It was only the spark. Investigations would follow, audits, lawsuits. Relatives who once clung to my father's authority began whispering about distancing themselves, about protecting their own reputations. The empire my parents had built on glitter and deception was unraveling thread by thread, and my sister, who had spent her life basking in the glow of their favoritism, was suddenly drowning in the consequences. The Cartier on her wrist no longer sparkled, it shackled. I went home that night and sat in front of my computer, the files still open, the folders neatly organized. I didn't feel joy, not yet. What I felt was resolve. Because this wasn't just about revenge. This was about balance, about taking back the years they had stolen, the dignity they had stripped away, the silence they had forced on me. And I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. They had erased me from one photograph. But I was about to write myself into every chapter of their downfall. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It spread like cracks across ice, starting invisible, then splintering until the whole surface gave way. Within days of the gala, whispers turned into headlines. Family business faces allegations of financial misconduct. Lavish spending raises questions about Harrington Empire. The Cartier watch became a symbol, plastered in articles and social media posts. The photo of my sister smiling with it on her wrist, placed side by side with the leaked receipt. Strangers on the internet debated whether it was theft or just arrogance. But the damage was already done. The narrative had escaped my parents' control. Regulators opened an inquiry. At first, my father brushed it off as political noise. But when investigators began calling board members for questioning, I knew the ground was shifting beneath him. Relatives who had once sung his praises started calling me quietly, their voices hushed, testing whether I knew anything. I said little, just enough to let them wonder how much I'd seen, how much I'd kept hidden. Their fear was its own kind of power. At family gatherings, the atmosphere turned poisonous. My mother avoided eye contact with me, as if afraid that one glance might reveal what she suspected, that I had something to do with all of this. My sister grew restless, snapping at waitstaff, pacing rooms, her once effortless charm cracking under the weight of scrutiny. "It's just a watch," she hissed once when she thought no one was listening. Why are they making it such a big deal? But the truth was, it wasn't just the watch. It was everything it represented. Favoritism, arrogance, misuse of funds, entitlement. The watch was only the visible tip of the iceberg. And beneath the surface was a mountain of rot. The investigations dug deeper. Auditors uncovered the LLC registered under my mother's name. Payments shuffled to shield taxes. Offshore accounts linked to cousins who hadn't worked a day in the business. Each revelation spawned new headlines, new whispers. Investors backed out. Contracts dissolved. The image of the flawless Harrington family collapsed in real time. And I watched it all unfold, like a film I had already seen, frame by frame, exactly as I had scripted it in my mind. I never spoke publicly. I never gave interviews. I remained the shadow, the overlooked daughter, the one no one thought to question. That invisibility, the thing that had once hurt me the most, was now my greatest armor. While my parents scrambled to defend themselves, while my sister posted desperate captions about staying strong through challenges, I walked through the chaos untouched. I still went to work, still saw my friends, still lived my life. And every time another headline dropped, another lawsuit filed, another investor pulled out, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle deeper into my bones. Relatives who had once parroted my parents' dismissal of me now sent me cautious messages, asking how I was holding up. "It must be hard on you too," they'd write, as if rewriting history could erase the years they had sided against me. I responded with politeness, but never warmth. I had learned that their concern was conditional, transactional. They didn't care about me. They cared about proximity to stability. And I was not their stability. Not anymore. The photos still haunted me sometimes, the one where they had smiled without me. But now, when I looked at it, I didn't feel the sting of exclusion. I saw it as evidence, proof of their arrogance, proof of their blindness, proof that they had handed me the very weapon I would use to dismantle their empire. By erasing me, they had shown the world their true values. And those values were exactly what destroyed them. The investigations weren't quick. They dragged on for months, even years. Each wave of revelations pulling them further down. My father lost his seat on the board. My mother's name was dragged through legal filings she couldn't brush off as mistakes. My sister, once the golden child, found doors closing in her face as luxury brands quietly cut ties. Wary of the bad press, and through it all, stayed silent, watching, waiting, planning, because this wasn't just revenge, it was justice. And justice, when served cold, is not only satisfying, it's permanent. The real unraveling began when subpoenas landed on the mahogany desk in my parents' study. I wasn't there, of course, but I heard about it from an aunt who couldn't resist gossip. "They look like they'd seen ghosts," she whispered, over the phone, her voice trembling with both fear and excitement. Federal auditors weren't something you could charm with champagne or brush off with a press release. My father, who had spent decades believing he was untouchable, was now being summoned to answer questions under oath. I imagined the scene clearly. The polished conference room, my father in his tailored suit, the flag behind the investigators, the recorder clicking on. For the first time in his life, he couldn't talk over the other party. Every question was pointed, every answer recorded, every hesitation noted. "Did you authorize the creation of Harrington Consulting? Why? Were funds routed through an entity not disclosed to shareholders? Can you explain this property purchased under a relative's name?" He would try to deflect, to laugh, to charm. But charm doesn't balance books, and charm doesn't erase receipts. Meanwhile, my mother was called in separately. Unlike my father, she wasn't trained in boardrooms and negotiations. She had lived her whole life in the curated role of hostess, the smiling matriarch. But under pressure, her veneer cracked. She contradicted herself, grew flustered, snapped at investigators. Every misstep was documented, every inconsistency highlighted. The woman who had once told me, just us. The most beloved people now sat sweating under fluorescent lights, her words tangled, her image shredded. The relatives began to scatter like frightened birds. Cousins distanced themselves, claiming they had no knowledge of the financial dealings, though their names were plastered across shell companies. One uncle quietly struck a deal with investigators, trading information for leniency. He was the same uncle who had once chuckled about the price of my sister's watch, the one who thought 15,000 tile was a casual indulgence. Now, under pressure, he was recounting transactions in excruciating detail, peeling back layers of deceit that my parents had thought were impenetrable. And the press. God, the press feasted. Headlines multiplied daily. Empire in crisis. From Cartier to courtrooms. The rise and fall of the Harrington family. They dug into old photos, old parties, old speeches, turning every sign of wealth into evidence of corruption. My sister's social media became an archive of excess. Vacations, handbags, dinners, all of it reframed as stolen spoils. The comments on her post turned vicious. Where once people praised her beauty and glamour, now they accused her of leeching off stolen funds, of flaunting wealth built on lies. She tried to fight back with statements about innocence and standing strong, but the tide had turned. The golden child was tarnished. Through all of this, I remained silent, living my life in plain sight, but always in the shadows of the storm. I went to work, smiled at colleagues, paid my bills on time. No one suspected me. Why would they? I was the forgotten one, the invisible one, the daughter left out of family photos. And that invisibility was my shield. While their faces splashed across headlines and their names filled court documents, mine never appeared. I was untouched, clean, free. The irony was almost poetic. They had erased me to make their picture perfect. But now the world was tearing that picture apart, piece by piece, and I was the only one who remained intact. The more they sank, the stronger I felt, not because of cruelty, but because of clarity. I had spent my whole life doubting my worth, questioning whether I was the problem, but watching them crumble showed me the truth. I had never been the problem. They had. Their greed, their favoritism, their arrogance, those were the flaws. I was simply the mirror that reflected them back, and they couldn't stand to see it. And still, I wasn't done. Because revenge, true revenge, isn't just about watching someone fall. It's about rising above them so completely that they can never touch you again. And I was only halfway there. The trial stretched for years, each one stripping another layer off the illusion my parents had built so carefully. Courtrooms replaced ballrooms. Transcripts replaced toasts. The same hands that once raised crystal glasses in celebration now clutched manila folders of evidence, trembling. My father, who had once towered over every room with his booming voice, shrank in stature as prosecutors read off charge after charge. Wire fraud, tax evasion, misuse of corporate funds. Each indictment was like a stone thrown through stained glass until nothing of the family's pristine image remained. My mother sat beside him, no longer radiant in pearls and silk, but pale, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness, her fingers clutching tissues that never stayed dry for long. The relatives who had once flaunted the family name now scrambled to scrub it from their resumes, their businesses, their conversations. They avoided each other at public functions, avoided me even more, though some still tried. We didn't know, they would whisper, their voices trembling with guilt and self-preservation. I only nodded, offering no judgment, no forgiveness. I didn't need to. Their fear of me, of what I knew, of what I might still reveal, was punishment enough. My sister, once the untouchable golden child, faced her own reckoning. At first, she tried to keep the mask on, posting filtered photos, pretending life was unchanged. But soon, the comments overwhelmed her. Sponsors cut ties. Friends evaporated. The watch that had once been her crown jewel became a curse. Every time she lifted her hand, cameras zoomed in, the public ridiculing the symbol of her downfall. She stopped wearing it, but it was too late. The image had been burned into the public's mind. Without her parents' shield, she was just another heiress caught in scandal, her name forever stained. And me? I walked through the storm, untouched. My name never appeared in the papers, never surfaced in court filings. I was the ghost in the machine, the invisible architect of their collapse. Colleagues at work saw me only as steady, reliable, the woman who kept her head down while chaos raged elsewhere. Friends knew me as loyal, present, unshaken. I built my life deliberately, brick by brick, while theirs crumbled into dust. The day the final verdict was read, I stood outside the courthouse, watching as cameras flashed and journalists shouted. My father was sentenced to years in prison. My mother was fined heavily, barred from holding any financial positions again. My sister wept openly, mascara streaking her face as she clung to a lawyer's arm. The Cartier long gone, but the stain of it eternal. No one looked at me. I was just another face in the crowd, and yet I was the only one who knew the full truth. That night, I returned to my apartment, poured myself a glass of wine, and pulled out the family photo, the one where they had smiled without me. I stared at it for a long time. Once, it had felt like proof of my erasure. Now, it felt like proof of my freedom, because they had shown me exactly who they were, and I had used that knowledge to dismantle everything they thought was indestructible. I didn't hang the photo. I didn't need to. Instead, I slid it into a folder labeled simply Closure and tucked it away. My revenge wasn't about keeping souvenirs. It was about finally being free. Free from the hunger for their approval. Free from the constant comparisons. Free from the weight of being unseen. And as I sat in the quiet of my home, the city lights glowing through the window, I realized something that made me smile. Not the brittle smile I had worn at their parties, but a real one, soft and unforced. They had erased me from their picture, but in the end it didn't matter, because I had stepped into a bigger frame, one of my own making, where I didn't need their validation, their wealth, or their name. My story was no longer theirs to write. It was mine, and if there's one lesson I carry with me, it's this. When someone cuts you out of their frame, don't fight to squeeze back in. Build your own picture. One day, they might realize they're the ones left standing on the outside, watching as you live a life they can never touch. So here's the truth they never saw coming. I wasn't erased. I was reborn. And that is a legacy no watch, no caption, no photograph can ever take away.